What is up, everybody? Happy Friday afternoon to you all. Maybe happy hour for some. A little early for that on my end of the world here, but hopefully you are all doing well and coming off of the high that is the NFL draft. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. And yes, even though it's kind of that after draft lull, we've got some things to talk about. I know the schedule release will be out, in a little bit as well, but we are going to be talking about maybe what's next moves wise for the Cincinnati Bengals. And we're going to unveil a new segment, a little bit of a surprise for you. But John, how are you, sir? Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday. The high of the NFL draft, maybe the low of the NFL draft for some, whatever the case may be. This year really did confirm to me that there's really nothing like the NFL draft. The fact that it's not even like a game and there's so many eyes and ears and emotions attached to it, it's truly remarkable. And it just remains that the NFL is just king at this. And there's nothing quite like it. And it just invokes a wide range of reactions and analysis and everything. And it's special, man. It truly is.
It is. And obviously it being held where it was held this year was also making it extra special with the history of Lambeau Field, Green Bay Packers, etc. But we are not going to talk too much about the Packers. We're going to talk about the Bengals and what may be coming up next. Our thanks to those who are tuning in live and or after the fact. If you want to get this show and the others on our podcast channel, which include Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, as well as 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. You can get that through your favorite audio streamer, whether that's Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, all the major ones. And you got to go to the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel. We are part of the Believe podcast network now. So got to go check that out. Resubscribe to that or subscribe to it. If you're new, subscribe to that feed. If you would, leave us a review. That would help. And of course, if you like the video side of things, you can get this stream with live streams through our YouTube channel, all the videos after the fact, plus some others that aren't on the podcast channel. So if you like the YouTube thing, go to the bottom right-hand side of your screen, click the show icon, click the subscribe, the thumbs up, all that stuff, and check out all the stuff we've got coming in. We've got some fun stuff down the pike too, so we'll keep you apprised of that. And then, of course, you can get the live stream through some Twitter accounts that we have it linked to, as well as the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, where you can get all the podcast videos and articles put up by Cincy Jungle. So check that out. And of course, you got to go check out what John is doing, the great work over at A to Z Sports there too. So we got you covered from all kinds of different bases. But shameless self-promotion aside, John Sheeran, I think everybody now is going, okay, well, like you said, there are mixed reviews about the draft class. Some people are saying it may have been one of the worst in the NFL per some, metrics and that sort of thing. Some are saying I really see the value in the upside. So mixed opinions. Regardless, I think everybody still came out of it going, yeah, there's still some questions at some different spots. I guess let's talk first and foremost about one guy that's been, I guess, patiently waiting for a new deal, a reworked contract. He's kind of been last, unfortunately, in the pecking order. That is Trey Hendrickson. A report of sorts from the Athletic's Diana Rossini came out this week that I guess was a little bit positive. But again, there's not any huge news momentum on it. But it sounds like there's some, I guess, quote unquote, good vibes coming out of Cincinnati that they want to get this thing done per Diana Rossini.
Yeah, so I think the exact quote from Scoop City, which is the athletics podcast with Diane Rossini and former NFL quarterback Chase Daniel, was, I did a little digging on it, and I'm still getting really good vibes coming out of Cincy that they're going to try to get a deal done with Trey Hendrickson, which in the grand scheme of things, it's not exactly news. Like, that's just been the MO for the past, I guess, 2-3 months now since this has really been a topic. And I guess the reason why she did that digging and was talking to people was because there were the optics of the Bengals taking a defensive end with the 17th overall pick as potentially a precursor to some forthcoming move with Trey, and not in the sense of extending him, but maybe in the sense of expecting him to be gone in a year or maybe trading him. Obviously, trading him didn't happen. And if it didn't happen now, it's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. I guess the trade deadline would be the next plausible place where that could happen, but still, that's an extremely rare move for the Bengals to make. So when the draft came and gone, and Hendrickson was still here, like, that was still what it is. And as long as he is still here, it is still within the Bengals' best interest to try and work something out with him. And it's still obviously in Hendrickson's best interest to get something done. But I don't think that this report was any indication that progress has been made or that negotiations are getting better and that it's about to come. It's about to happen. The whole thing about this for the past several weeks has been, this is just a long process that's going to be both sides kind of waiting each other out. And whichever side obviously grows impatient more ends up taking whatever deal is on the table. And I think it's still more likely than not that Trey is going to be the party that does that, but it doesn't seem like anything is happening any faster. It just means that the status quo remains the same regardless about who was the 17th overall pick. In this case, it just happens to be a guy who plays his position.
Yeah, and I mean, one would think that you'd like to think that the Bengals in some ways improved their pass rush so far this offseason, but how much that needle moved remains to be seen. So, I mean, some of that may help Trey to get maybe a little bit more. If you're getting the Joseph Osai from late last year, you mix in Shamar Stewart, Miles Murphy takes another leap and gets more playing time. Maybe he gets a little more pass rush help to continue to aid him and, continue to boost his high stats that he's been putting up since really his whole career, but really with the Cincinnati Bengals. So, I think once we saw night one go by and there was no trade struck, you kind of felt like, I mean, based on reports that the Bengals wanted a lot of capital for Trey Hendrickson if a trade was to be made, that if there was not going to be something on night one where they would net night one picks plus other stuff, you kind of felt like, okay, they're going to try and work this out one way or the other. And it sounds like the Bengals are willing to do something. It's just not what Trey's camp is necessarily looking for. So where those two sides meet, we'll have to see. But I mean, it sounds like things are at least in a little bit better place rapport wise, whether that is between the parties or the Bengals approach where, they're not caught up with all the draft evaluations, the draft itself, that sort of thing. And this is kind of now primary focus, you would hope.
You would hope. I mean, I don't know if we can comment on if the situation is any better. I think it's still, Trey is probably along the lines of willing to remove himself or not participate in organized team activities, and maybe it gets as far as training camp. If obviously there's 2 to 3 months until that time, but I think he still wants to utilize whatever leverage that he has. And I think as it happens, like, the Bengals gained some leverage by drafting Shamar Stewart just because of the nature of the position that he plays. But I think they would still obviously envision Trey helping him out and guiding him, which is what Shamar Stewart, I think it was one of the first things that he said after he was drafted by the Bengals. He wants to be Trey's quote unquote best buddy. He wants to live in his pocket and emulate what he does, which is exactly what you would want your first round pick to do when you have arguably the best player at his position playing on the same team. And I think in order for Stewart's development to reach the place that it probably needs to be this year, you need Trey in the building helping him out. And I think it would be such a disservice for Stewart if Trey is not there. And unfortunately, I understand why Trey is doing what he's doing. And I understand even if I don't agree with it. I understand why the Bengals are holding firm because it's what they do, but it seems like that is a negative ramification here if these two sides don't come to the table before Stewart gets on the field and starts ramping up his development and his training before the season. So I don't know if it's gotten to that point. I highly doubt that Trey feels obligated at this point to give anything more than what he has to for the Bengals if they're not going to give him what he wants. But yeah, it just seems like in the end, nothing has really changed, which I guess is not a positive or negative because obviously things can get worse. And there's like, another trade request that trade sends out there and he's even more pissed. So I guess it hasn't gotten to that point, which is, it's not a negative, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the next phase is then, okay, the Bengals have their draft class set. They have their group of UDFAs. I guess if we want to continue to talk, there's a departure we can talk about as well, and we will in just a little bit, a potential one. But I think if we're talking about additions or that sort of thing, I think you would obviously, the big talking point is guard and safety. Those are the two big talking points there. There were some rumblings that Justin Simmons kind of mentioned the Bengals a little while back about playing for the Bengals and the Joe Burrow effect there, that sort of thing. And then, of course, yes, the Bengals did get two guard / versatile offensive linemen in the draft in Jalen Rivers and Dylan Fairchild. But it's still, you still kind of are wondering, okay, what's the veteran presence there? Lucas Patrick came on board in free agency, but again, how much is that needle moving? How much, especially rookie guys, if they're thrust into the lineup right away and supplant Cordell Volson, Cody Ford, that sort of thing? I mean, how much improvement will you see from the interior of the offensive line right away with younger guys or some newer guys that you go, well, I mean, he's kind of been a journeyman, that sort of thing. Is Brandon Scherf in the plans? Dalton Reisner, who was talking a little bit about the Bengals, I think, in a social media video, that sort of thing. I mean, do you see any of those guys being true possibilities, or is it, hey, we like, again, they got their guys, they're sticking with their guys, sort of thing?
I think the fact that we saw two guys that can and probably will play guard at some point in their careers with the Bengals, it doesn't remove it from the equation, but it makes it far less likely that they will sign a Scherf or a Reisner. I think the only way that something like that happens is if they take the free agents, of course, Scherf or Reisner take like significantly less than what they would probably want. And Reisner has never been a guy that bangs the table to break the bank, right? He's always kind of signed close to vet minimum because I don't know who negotiates for him, but he's never really been able to maximize his earnings. I think Scherf is looking for probably more than what the Bengals would be willing to offer because, again, they attracted Lucas Patrick to them and they persuaded Cody Ford to stay under the pretense that they would have a chance to start. And I think having this much confidence out the gate with Dylan Fairchild to start at left guard, it's probably his job to win. So that is going to be a quote unquote competition. I think it's going to be Fairchild leading the pack, getting every chance to start. It's not a guarantee that he starts, but I think they would like to exit training camp feeling at least somewhat comfortable about him starting week one, which really means that like right guard is completely open season and you already have Ford and Patrick who are here again under the pretense that they have a chance to start, and then Cordell Volson is still here. And if he doesn't win the starting job, maybe he has to find work someplace else. So I think there's just, in their mind, there's probably enough bodies where they feel like they can have a sensible competition, which I think puts guard at like third in my rankings of like most likely positions that they sign a veteran. I would put defensive tackle over it just because they didn't draft one. I know they reportedly have signed 3 of them in undrafted free agency, including a guy from the National Player Pathway Program and Dante Barnett from England, which is an interesting story in and of itself. But Howard Cross and Eric Gregory, the other 2 undrafted guys that I think got pretty decent contracts, and they were like the first to agree to terms because they knew that they wanted to draft a defensive tackle potentially in round 1 with Walter Nolan, and they didn't. So by bypassing that position entirely, I think there was an eagerness to address it in college free agency. And now there's still, I guess, technically 7 on the roster with these unofficial signings that haven't been official yet. I could see them going after just one low-level vet so they have, confirmed depth at that spot, and maybe safety as well, since they didn't draft one there either, and there's probably not as much depth behind Geno Stone and Jordan Battle as they would probably like.
The other thing, not to continue kicking the can down the road, I mean, we talked about, there's this, a little bit of rush of free agency for right after the draft where teams didn't, get the guys that they wanted in the class, or maybe they pivoted to other positions and said, we still have a hole here, but not to continue kicking the can down the road. But there's also the unfortunate thing of, OTAs and training camp and all that kind of stuff, where there is another flurry of activity because of injuries or perceived ineffectiveness from either new faces or guys that they were relying upon. So the Bengals may be interested in some guys here right after the draft, but it also may be a summertime thing where some of these things come more to fruition, whether it's an injury issue or they just aren't as comfortable with the state of the roster in certain spots as others. But I mean, when you look at names out there, Scherf and Simmons, you kind of say, well, I mean, are they going to really be there in July? I don't, I would tend to think they would, land somewhere before then, but stranger things have happened.
I mean, it could just be a case of they don't want to go through OTAs, right? Like these guys have been in the league for a long time and they want to just minimize the amount of work, knowing that whatever team calls about them, they're calling about, hey, like we need a starter here. We need someone that can play significant snaps. And their pedigree speaks for itself. They can kind of afford to wait it out. Like, I mean, that's how a guy like Reisner joined the Vikings originally. Like he was signed in week 3 of 2023. Yeah. So that was the first time he entered free agency that offseason. And for whatever reason, he just chooses really late. Like he just kind of bides his time and picks his spot. Like, where am I going to be maximized the most? And it happened to be Minnesota that year. And then he re-signed last year and he's still available now. So I'm sure that there have been teams that called him. I don't know for a fact that the Bengals are one of those teams. There were conflicting reports about that. But what I know now is that I think the Bengals aren't looking for a solid guaranteed starting option at guard or really any position right now. I think the guys that they have in the building now, they're comfortable winning those jobs, whatever jobs are available.
Yeah. And if a player signs after, I think week 1 or week 2, doesn't that affect like the guaranteed money in the contract?
Like that,
yeah. So I think also that's something that appeals to teams. The Bengals used to do that sort of thing, wait after week 1, week 2 to try and get by and then get someone on a more team-friendly contract in that respect. We're going to get to a new segment on a couple of different players in just a second. It's a spin off of a classic, but before we do, we gotta applaud the super chat there. Wow. Thank you very much, Sten. Do you guys think we got better, and with what positions? I would say marginally better. There are some. I wouldn't say I'm leaping out of my seat saying this team's going to be a lot better. You are placing a lot of faith in your defensive coordinator to just make that unit better. Yes, I think TJ Slayton helps. Yes, I think Shamar Stewart can help even in a reserve role. Yes, I have high hopes for Murphy and Osai to take that next step in their careers. We'll see what happens with the 2 linebackers that they drafted this year. I think Knight is slated, and we'll talk more about that in just a second too. I think, but it feels, again, like we talked about last week, John, where it just, you got a problem here. Well, we just did this. We did this. We plugged the holes in the dam, but I don't know that whatever metaphor did the waters rise, or did you solve the problems? I don't know. It felt like you're treading water a little bit.
You are treading water. I think there hasn't been an off season that I can remember where it's like, yeah, the Bengals got worse. Like that just doesn't happen. At least you don't feel that way in May. The times where you felt the most confident that they got better were the times when they appeared to be the most productive in free agency. 2021 and 2022 comes to mind, filling those really massive needs on the roster at the time with quality players that you knew could play in the NFL. Ever since then, there have been varying strategies in free agency, and most of them haven't necessarily worked outside of like 1 or 2 guys. And then this year, like, they added a nose tackle, they added a backup linebacker, they added a backup running back, and then they added guys that have a really good chance of starting, but do they necessarily raise your overall roster talent level to the place where it probably needs to be? It remains to be seen. I think a lot of it has to do with people are pointing to addition by subtraction and replacing some guys that were no longer effective at their roles with some guys that are a lot younger but ultimately unproven. And you don't know, you really don't know if the guys that are replacing them on the roster are going to be significantly better or better enough to the point where it makes the team competitive in the way that it wants to be competitive. So it ultimately depends on if these draft picks in recent years are actually up to snuff, and they're going to give them the chance to find out.
I will say that it appears that almost all of the defensive players seem to be in a good mindset with the defensive coordinator change, with some of the vague statements that they have made about simplification. I think Logan Wilson now has kind of joined that chorus. You had comments from Joseph Osai when he re-signed his 1-year deal, that sort of thing. So you had some of that stuff, but there is one player who does not seem to be enamored, or hasn't seemed to be overly enamored with the direction of the defensive coordinator decision, and rumors continue to linger about the future of Germaine Pratt, particularly with 2 linebackers being drafted and Demetrius Knight being one that seems to be the logical replacement. But John, latest on this, I mean, there hasn't been a move here, but it seems as if, and again, you would have thought if there was a trade, it would have probably happened on day 3 of the draft, if there was some sort of thing that they were going to net this year. It didn't happen, so that there's a little bit of fluidity here.
Yeah, I would say that the only way that the trade happens now is if there is another team looking to release another one of their players, and it's like a Billy Price, BJ Hill situation, only happening in May and not right before cut down in August. So I don't really see that happening. That is the one pathway in which this can open up, and I think maybe they're biding their time until they have to release Germaine Pratt. Remember, like, rookie minicamp happens exactly a week from now, and at that point, I think around 14 undrafted free agents are going to be officially added to the team. Right now, they're at 78, so that's going to put them at 92. They're going to have a roster exemption for the international player, Dante Barnett, so that puts them at 91. So I still think that they would need to release one player to fit all these guys under the offseason roster. And the most likely one is going to be Germaine Pratt. So I would imagine within the next week, before those undrafted free agents signings become official, Germaine Pratt's probably going to get released. But again, like, the only way a trade happens is if there's just a magical fit somewhere else in the NFL about, hey, we would like this guy and we would like to give you, one player that we would like to cut. And that's just how that happens. But then again, you'd still need to clear up one more roster spot. So I think the release is still the most likely within the next week.
Let's just say, and I'm with you on that, but let's just say somehow, some way, they don't go that route and Pratt is on the roster. What do you think his role? What do you think his impact? What do you think his attitude will be like if he's still on this team at this point? And like you said, also a release, depending on, I don't have the cap numbers in front of me, but depending on that could also play into some sort of extension for Trey Hendrickson, that sort of thing. Regardless, I'm just playing devil's advocate. What if he somehow, against seemingly all odds, that he is on this team this year? What do you foresee that being like? Do you think that that's a negative? Do you think that's, hey, more depth, or maybe this Shamar Stewart, Trey Hendrickson, take me under your wing thing? I don't know.
I promise you, Germaine Pratt would not like it for a couple reasons. We officially got the details of Zach Moss's new contract this week, and he took officially like a pay cut of about half of his salary was cut down. He got like a couple $100,000 in terms of guaranteed money, which I think is the equivalent of what they would have owed him for like an injury settlement. So they cut Zach Moss's pay basically in half, but they gave him a chance to make the team, obviously. But they cut his pay to reflect his new role within the running back group. He's no longer like the presumed starter like he was this time last year. Obviously, that's Chase Brown. So they are paying him in accordance to what they expect him to be on the team. Germaine Pratt is expected to make over $5 million, nearly $6 million this year, with a cap hit of over $8 million. If he stays, he's taking a significant pay cut, because there's no way that they draft Demetrius Knight. They make such a bold statement by drafting Demetrius Knight in the second round and have Germaine Pratt still start over him. He would take a significant pay cut, which obviously he doesn't want to do. And obviously he doesn't want to stay on a team and be a role player or reserve when he was the starter for the past 5 or 6 years. So that would be an extremely contentious situation that I think we both agree is highly unlikely.
Yeah, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. And I even if he does stay and is productive or can be productive, I don't know if there is some sort of dissension or negativity there. I don't even know if it's really worth keeping that around in your locker room there, even though Pratt does seem to have, quite a few buddies on the team. If there's a clash of he and the new defensive coordinator, it just may not work. So we'll see what happens there with Germaine Pratt. I think the writing is somewhat on the wall here, so we'll have to see exactly how all of that plays out. We're going to get to a new segment in just a minute here. I want to just remind folks to get this show and the others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel through your favorite audio streamer. Resubscribe to that. The old Cincy Jungle podcast feed is defunct, so you got to go to Believe in Cincy, BLEAV, through your favorite audio streamer. Leave us a review. Go do the YouTube thing. Check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Facebook. All kinds of different stuff. We appreciate it. So many of you who have watched us over the years, around this time, it's spring, summer, and we start thinking about guys getting on the field and doing drills and then into camp and that sort of thing. And we've done this deal that's called potential breakout players. And unfortunately, it's been, for a couple of years, we kind of have some repeats. Maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year. I remember we've had Volson on there. We've had Zachary Carter on there. I mean, this goes back years and years and years. Yeah, I know. So we're doing a little bit of a different spin on this here. And it's a make or break player, 2025 make or break player. What we mean by this, just for a little clarification, is this person either needs to show up and play really well in camps, preseason, and or into the season should they make the team. So either or both, right? I mean, it could be, you gotta show out in the spring and summer, make the team, and then parlay that into a solid year to remain with the team and have a future with the team. So I'm going to go with some real low hanging fruit here, John. And I know we each have one to talk about here, but we have to talk about this guy, Jermaine Burton, a guy that many people were excited about. He was like the darling of workouts this time last year, right? I mean, he was all the video highlights, and it's like, oh man, can you imagine if this is their number 3 wide receiver? What if Yoshi takes the next step, and then you've got T and Jamar, and it just imploded for a lot of different reasons. And you can go back also. John and I had the pleasure of talking with TJ Hushmanzada. I believe it was in October, right? It was right after the Bengals beat the Raiders. So fun interview with him as to be expected. But we asked him point blank about what's going on with Burton. What have you said to him? Because TJ was in town and talked to him. Burton, I think in that game, John, that was the one where he was a healthy scratch for the first time, if I'm not mistaken. So there's since been some other issues that have gone on off the field, but the bottom line is Jermaine Burton has been in the Bengals doghouse the entirety of his rookie year. He's got a lot of work to do to get out of it and hopefully get his head on straight to be a productive player. We know the talent's there. We know the talent is there. There's a track record in college where he bounced around to a lot of different schools. Nick Saban made some pretty infamous statements about him when the Bengals drafted him. So this, and I say make or break, usually you go, okay, it's year 3, right? Year 3 is where you really gauge a player, that sort of thing. But I think in year 2, if you're not only not seeing progress on the field, but you're also kind of still having these other issues that plagued him last year, he could be a guy that was a high pick that may not see out his whole rookie contract with the Bengals if things do not work out. I don't think that's a stretch in saying that. But if he does get things in order, he does get his house in order, he does, do things the right way, doesn't have to be an all-star with Chase and Higgins on the team, but if he can be that long ball guy, that speed guy opposite Chase and do all the different things we have seen him do, that takes this offense to the absolute next level. And oh, by the way, can help you out in the kick return game potentially too.
Well, for starters there, that is his biggest way of impacting this team because he found that role late last year and it's something that fits his skill set. He's a fast and explosive player, and the kickoff return aspect of the game is only getting more important because teams are now incentivized more and more to make sure that the ball is in the landing area and not a touchback, because now it starts at the 35. So he's going to have a really good chance of earning that role, and it's a role that's going to keep him active on game days if he does obviously the right things between Monday and Saturday to make sure that he is active on game days. But you're right, man. Going back to this time last year, there was a lot of pressure on the Bengals and Burton to just immediately being good, because at this time you didn't know that Joseph was going to be the player that he was and ascend into that third wide receiver role. And obviously there's still more growth that Yoshi can make as a young player himself, but there was pressure on Burton potentially being the number 3 receiver and starting and proving all this doubt about him and his character wrong. And obviously the absolute worst case scenario didn't happen, but it wasn't far from it for his rookie season for how it went down. So now that you have your top 3 established, now that you have Higgins obviously here for the long term, because that was another thing, right? Is he potentially T. Higgins' long-term replacement, because he was only here for another year at the time. That pressure is gone in terms of him being one of the top 3 receivers on this team. Draft status at this point is out the window. At this point, you're just hoping that he does enough to obviously stay with the team and be ready if he is called upon as a receiver, because Trenton Irwin was the number 4 receiver in this offense for a handful of years. And when his number was called, he stepped up and made plays, and he always continued to be reliable to make sure that he would continue to get those opportunities. And that is the opportunity now in Fred and Burton, with these 3 guys ahead of him, with a clear role on special teams in line for him. And if he just does the right things, he can just salvage whatever is left of this rookie contract. He has 3 years left. It doesn't make sense to cut him financially this year, but it makes a lot more sense next year if things don't progress right. So you're right, man. Even for a 3rd round pick and entering year 2, this might as well be a year 3 make it or break it for Germaine Burton for so many other reasons.
Yeah, I think this year he is safe, and I also think that the draft class, not going wide receiver, maybe that was super predictable because of the long-term deals that they got done with both Chase and Higgins. You go, well, that's just not a need, but you almost do the old deal where, oh man, Burton might be one of those extra picks this year because he gave you nothing last year. And so now maybe he takes the next step, matures. And I love the thought process that you just laid out about the lack of pressure on him to be, superstar guy, live up to, the billing of Chase and Higgins and all that kind of stuff. They don't need that. If he can be a deep threat, if he can be somewhat reliable, like you said, when called upon, if he can give you the occasional nice return in the kick return game, there you go. That's a good foundation to keep building on and moving forward into year 3. But if it's more of the same, like you said, even if if it's as big of a mess as it was last year, I'm really interested to see what the Bengals end up doing and if they're going to, pull the plug on that, or if they're going to let things ride out in year 2 because they did not draft a wide receiver in this year's class. And they're thinking that at least he'll give us something and much more than last year.
Yeah, if things go off the rails this year, it's going to be looked at as one of the worst picks, especially in the Zach Taylor era, but maybe in recent Bengals history. So that there is still pressure, obviously, with that. There's also pressure on the other side of the ball because, Anthony, it seemed unlikely that the Bengals are going to be able to replace both Germaine Pratt and Geno Stone in one offseason, even if, obviously, both players last year didn't perform at their best. The Bengals decided essentially to move on from Germaine Pratt and stick with Geno Stone for at least another year. And Geno Stone is interesting because we forget that he's essentially the same age as a guy who's in the last year of his rookie contract. And despite the fact that this is his second team in his second contract, he entered the league really young at like 21, coming out of Iowa for the Ravens. He spent a handful of years there, and then he signed with the Bengals at only 25, 24 years old. I think he was actually 24 years old when he put pen to paper, and then he turned 25 before the season began. But for someone who's now going to be 26, entering his second contract year, this is the most important season of Geno Stone's career. It's not even a question. And considering the fact that last year didn't start anywhere near the way that the Bengals or Geno or the fans wanted it to, it only adds to that pressure because it was viewed as a really good value signing when the Bengals signed him into free agency, someone that could play the post safety role a lot better than what Dax Hill was able to do as a rookie or as a second-year player in 2023. And they realized that that's not the player that Geno Stone is. And they tried to just fit a square peg into a round hole, and the defense suffered because of that. And so much of Louis Anarumo's defense was dependent on the effectiveness of his safeties. And Geno Stone just couldn't provide that until some changes were made, obviously, to the scheme on defense. And then all of a sudden the interceptions started coming down. The playmaking ability that showed up on tape for Geno Stone and the Ravens, that started to show up. And I think part of that played into their willingness to say, hey, if we don't find or don't pull the trigger on a safety in the NFL draft, we're at least comfortable with giving Stone one last chance here. And this is going to be his one last chance. And the fact that it is a contract year, that only adds to the importance of it. And the fact that there is no Justin Simmons or Julian Blackmon in the building probably isn't going to be that case anyways. There's no Xavier Watts that was drafted to replace him, no Kevin Winston that was drafted to replace him. It's all on him. And it's basically just either him or a Tyson Anderson if he gets an opportunity, if things don't progress the way that they need to in the season. I think obviously he's safe throughout training camp and the preseason. He still needs to look the part, obviously, but once the season begins, like the clock is starting to tick for Geno Stone. And I don't know how long of a leash he'll have with Tyson Anderson kind of looking over his shoulder. Obviously, it's not the ideal situation. At best, you can stretch it into a Sean Williams type situation where he was obviously a special team savant in his early years with the Bengals in the mid-2010s, and then he got his chance to play next to Reggie Nelson, and all of a sudden he earned an extension in 2016. Like maybe that is the path for Tyson Anderson supplanting a Geno Stone, but that would have to be the worst case scenario if Stone doesn't progress the way that he showed he could at the end of last season. So this is an extremely important year for Geno Stone, a player that obviously a lot of fans I think wanted to move on from, but he's still here, and now all is on the table for him to kind of make the most of it.
If you go back to when we were entering 2024 free agency and Stone's name was getting kicked around as a possibility for the Bengals, and then they ultimately signed him, which was somewhat predictable in a lot of different ways. But if you remember, what did he have with the Ravens that year? Like 6 or 7 interceptions, I think.
7.
Yeah. So if you remember the year prior, they had Dax Hill, and it wasn't just Dax that was showing this problem, but Dax Hill had his hands on probably 3 or 4 different balls that should have been interceptions. And so when we talked about Stone coming to Cincinnati, you go, okay, maybe they move Dax Hill around to something else and he'll take the next step. And then Stone's going to be the guy that can be, get you those big plays, that sort of thing. And it didn't really happen, as you mentioned, until the very end of the year. And the Bengals were playing, I think what was one, a pick six, I think was against Will Levis, if I'm not mistaken. And some of the teams and some of the quarterbacks they were going up against, okay, but you play with who's on your schedule and you play who's in front of you. And kudos to Stone for turning around what was an abysmal start to the season to making some nice plays and helping the Bengals almost get to the playoffs by winning all those games at the end of the year there. It's still this question of, okay, what was so different about the end of last year that caused a player like Stone, Joseph Osai, and others to really take that next step? And will the new defensive coordinator, Al Golden, be able to kind of harness that or build off of what they were doing at the end there and continue that momentum that we saw from the defense at the end of the year? And so that's just a big question mark. And we keep kind of stating the same thing in a different way, but this all comes down to really trusting and believing what Al Golden is bringing to the table. And is he going to get the right players out there? Is he going to get the most of them out there? I thought it was very telling that the Bengals passed on Xavier Watts, a safety that Al Golden loved, 3 times. Mm-hmm. And then, like you said, they didn't go after really anyone else in that regard. So yeah, they had other players, and not every single pick was going to go on the defensive side of the ball, but you kind of figured that if they were, that was probably one of the guys that they were going to target because he's Golden's golden boy, right? Watts was. So I think that may show a little bit of the confidence that they have in what they can get out of Geno Stone and others from the defense based on what we saw towards the end of the last year.
And I'll just say this, like I did hear that the Bengals, there are people in the building that wanted to draft a safety or expecting a safety to be drafted. I think sometimes when teams pass on positions of need, it kind of gets viewed as, oh, well, clearly they're comfortable at that spot. And to an extent that is true, but I think there was still an expectation in some parts of the building that at the very least more competition would be coming for Stone. And maybe they're not as comfortable as we may think that it is just because they passed on Watts. Like if they had signed like a starting guard in free agency, maybe they end up going with Watts over a Dylan Fairchild. Like the nature of the entire offseason, it resulted in the draft that we saw. But I also think that it's interesting with how, in terms of the differences between Anarumo and Golden, it's very clear that Golden wanted to build his defense from like the spine up, in terms of like linebackers are leading the charge, which makes sense because he's the linebackers guy and everything like that. But still, tackling is so important to his defense, and it should be for any defense. But it was one of the points of emphasis that he listed out when he was hired. And like Geno Stone, even in his good days with Baltimore, was not a good tackler, and it's right. I don't think it's an issue that's going away necessarily. So his playmaking abilities, I think, are still very much there, and they can be maximized more in a similar scheme that we saw at the end of last year. But if the tackling issues persist, like that is the main thing that can make or break Geno Stone's final year in Cincinnati. If this is his final year in Cincinnati, because I can't imagine the leash is going to be that long if he's consistently taking bad angles like he did last year, and more explosive plays are given up. Like Tyson Anderson, at that point, he can't just be riding on the bench when Geno Stone is doing this in front of him. But at the end of the day, like if he doesn't work out this year, that is two defensive coordinators, two schemes on the same team that he didn't perform well, and he enters free agency potentially losing a lot of money. But he can also gain a lot of money if he shows that out to be the player that they signed in the first place.
And all of this still goes back to, and I don't want to diminish the talents of Geno Stone or others, but all of this still goes back to Jesse Bates. You decided not to re-sign Jesse Bates. You assert Dax Hill into that lineup. You assert Nick Scott, right? I mean, you got all these guys in here, and it's like, oh man, all of those guys just it all adds up to, you know, you're chasing your tail because you didn't re-sign a star here. But hopefully Stone is like the guy that we saw at the end of 2024, and the Bengals continue to improve their defense. We'll see, though. It's a tall ask. But that is the first edition of Make or Break players. So hopefully you like that. We may still do potential breakout, but this is a little bit of a different spin. We just said Jermaine Burton isn't having pressure on him. And here we are on this show putting pressure on him as a make or break year. Of course, that's what we do. But we're going to have a little bit of an abbreviated show. We're going to get on out of here, John. Let's drop the mic. What do you have for us on the way out of the door, my friend?
I just wanted to address one of the first comments in the stream from Dan the Man. He's saying hello from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. I don't think you're being truthful, but I'm going to count it as truth because we would probably be the first Bengals podcast to be played in Mongolia, the land of the horses. Come on over to Kentucky. Obviously, there's some horses they're going to be racing this weekend if you are halfway across the world. So shout out to Dan from Mongolia. Big weekend out in your neck of the woods in a lot of different ways. The friend of mine who hosted was gracious enough to host me at his house when I was out for the draft. He and another high school friend of ours are actually going to Cincinnati. My friend's Greg, his wife is running. I think there's a Cincinnati Flying Pig Marathon, something to that effect. Ed Karras is running in that.
Yeah. So she's running in that, which is really cool. I think they're going to catch a Reds game, if I'm not mistaken, and then they are doing the Derby thing. So they're making a big weekend out of it out there. So I hope they have fun. And what's downtown Cincy like with the Derby? Is it a big gathering at places? No, okay,
not really. Yeah. I mean the Flying Pig, it kind of disrupts things in terms of traffic the morning of it. And everyone is focused around that, but no, I think people just kind of flock to bars to watch the Derby, which is still like, man, it's such a hype thing. It's like hours on the broadcast, and then the last 90 seconds at like 6:45 or whatever PM or something like that.
Yeah. What is? I didn't even look it up. I think my friend was telling me the history of the flying. Like someone who made the marathon said something to the effect of, "Oh, I'll run a marathon when pigs fly," or something like that, and they call it the Flying Pig Marathon. Am I right about that, or is that completely wrong? I don't.
Cincinnati is Porkopolis. Like, we did make a lot of bacon back in the day, so I think that has something to do with it. But okay. You might know more lore about it than I do. I'll have to look it up.
What isn't there a pig named Rooftop Bar right down there near the banks? Isn't there no? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, the Blind Pig. Yeah, it's
Blind
right next
Pig.
to the stadium.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going crazy. But anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in live. Thanks for listening after the fact. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Go check it out there. Check out our YouTube channel. And of course, our thanks to FOCO, the fans only company supporting our show. Go to foco.com. Check out, I think they're doing a deal still, 40% off of some exclusive bobbleheads that they have if you like the bobblehead thing. And they've got all kinds of stuff, apparel and all kinds of fun stuff. So go check out foco.com, check out their Bengals section, tell them that we sent you. We appreciate that. John, I appreciate you, my friend. I know we were, again, my schedule's just all over the place. And here you are. You just step up every time, man. I appreciate it. And of course, appreciate the knowledge you bring to the show.
See you guys.